In this video, we will talk about the battle for the city of Pokrovsk, which the Russians claim has already been conquered. According to Putin, all of Donetsk will be taken by force if it is not given to him. But is Russia really capable of doing this? Now, in early December, Dmitry Peskov, Vladimir Putin's spokesman, stated that the city of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region has been completely conquered. But Ukraine and international observers claim that, although much of the city is now under Russian control, the fighting in and around it continues intensely. According to what can be assessed from the information coming from the front line, Ukrainian resistance is limited to the northern part of the city, along the railway line, which still remains under Kyiv's control, with the use of guerrilla tactics, such as the systematic destruction of small Russian groups on the outskirts, being the strategy now adopted by the Ukrainian forces. But analysts warn that these actions, despite causing casualties to the enemy, are not sustainable in the long term, and that it is only a matter of time until the entire city and its surroundings fall under Russian control. The situation in Pokrovsk also directly affects the neighboring city of Myrnorad, about 7 kilometers to the southeast. Although the Russian presence in Myrnorad is considerably smaller, the city is becoming increasingly isolated, with the Russians controlling the main access routes, making it difficult for the Ukrainians to maintain communication and supply lines. Therefore, the fall of Pokrovsk is seen as the final blow for Myrnorad, making the evacuation of Ukrainian forces almost impossible. The battle for Pokrovsk, like many others in the war in Ukraine, was a battle of attrition, with Russia facing fierce resistance from Ukraine. The initial Russian strategy, as has been common in several battles for Ukrainian cities, began with an attempt to isolate Pokrovsk, with Russia using its strongpoint, artillery for this purpose, reinforced by aerial bombardments to weaken Ukrainian defenses and cause panic among the population. This pattern of heavy bombardments before a ground offensive has been repeated in many of the Russian battles for Ukrainian cities, such as in Bakhmut, with the idea being to destroy the immediate response capability of the opposing troops and weaken the defenses, creating breaches in the lines for an easier incursion. After the initial bombardment, Russia began to advance with its ground forces using small groups of infantry soldiers. But in this first phase, in January of 2025, a shortage of troops meant the Russians had difficulty maintaining control of the areas they had conquered. And because of this, on several occasions, Ukrainian forces managed to carry out counterattacks and recapture parts of the city. However, as Russia increased the number of soldiers involved, their envelopment tactics became more effective. The small groups of 5 to 6 soldiers began to expand into larger formations of up to 15 men, indicating an increase in the number of Russian forces available to advance toward the city center. This method of gradual advance, where the Russians initially use small formations and then consolidate them as they gain ground, was seen in several cities like Bakhmut, where Russian forces slowly expanded as Ukrainian resistance wore down. A clear pattern in the battle for Pokrovsk was the formation of pockets of Ukrainian resistance. These pockets were often surrounded, but not immediately defeated, forcing Russian troops to spend more time and resources to eliminate them. The Russian tactic in this case was to surround and bombard these pockets with artillery and drones, hoping the Ukrainians would surrender due to lack of supplies and pressure. This approach of surrounding, isolating, and bombarding specific points within a city has been a constant in Russian offensives. And in cities like Mariupol and Bakhmut, Russia adopted a similar tactic, where the priority wasn't necessarily conquering every street, but the encirclement and elimination of isolated groups that still offered resistance. What happened in Pokrovsk reveals that Russia has been following a relatively consistent pattern in its offensives against Ukrainian cities. First, there are intense bombardments, followed by an attempt to surround and isolate the city. And finally, the slow advance with small infantry units against the less fortified points inside the cities, aiming to create small pockets of Ukrainian resistance. A crucial point that stands out is the lack of evolution or variation in Russian tactics, with the Russians following the classic approach of bombarding, attempting to encircle and advancing directly against Ukrainian defensive positions. A tactic that has been resulting in steady advances, but extremely slow ones with very heavy casualties, revealing that Putin is using his greatest and most important weapon, an abundance of men to throw against the Ukrainian defenses. But if Russia truly wishes to conquer all of Donetsk and other fortified areas effectively, it will be necessary to evolve its tactics. The simple use of bombardments, encirclements, and direct advances with waves of soldiers may not be enough in the long run. And in fact, when we analyze the time and effort Russia spent to conquer Pokrovsk, with nearly a year and a half of relentless fighting, tens of thousands of casualties, and all of that just to occupy a city that had 60,000 inhabitants before the war, we can conclude that the fight to conquer much larger and much better defended cities, like Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, will demand many years and will likely result in hundreds of thousands of Russian casualties. This leads us to an important question. Is Vladimir Putin truly capable of conquering all of Donetsk, as he has claimed he will do if the region is not handed over in a peace agreement? Cities like Bakhmut and Pokrovsk were a tough battlefield, with the Russians needing several months and tens of thousands of casualties to conquer them. But other areas in the region like Sloviansk and Kramatorsk are much more fortified and present even more challenging resistance. The challenge for Russia isn't just conquering these fortified areas, but also maintaining a stable supply line and sustaining the long-term war effort. Russia's logistical difficulties combined with the growing number of casualties make Putin's goal of dominating the entire Donetsk region highly challenging. Therefore, despite Russia's ambitions, the reality on the battlefield and the challenges Russia faces suggest that no matter how much Putin wants to advance, it won't be easy, it won't be fast, and it won't be cheap to conquer the entire Donetsk region by force. This could prove to be a monumental task, requiring much more than what the Kremlin is prepared to offer right now. According to some conservative estimates, and considering the tactics, time, and cost Russia is facing to conquer cities, Putin will need at least another 4 or 5 years to conquer the portion of Donetsk still under Ukrainian control, and in the process will lose an estimated 300 to 400,000 soldiers. And that's just in that one sector of the front line, not counting the fighting in other areas. Of course, Ukraine will also lose a brutal number of soldiers. But as a general rule, the defending side tends to suffer 2 to 3 times fewer casualties than the attacking one, because the attacker is forced to expose themselves during advances against very well-defended areas. But it's undeniable that with the fall of Pokrovsk, the situation for Ukraine in Donetsk deteriorates even further. This is a victory the Kremlin will use at the negotiating table to try and get the concessions it so desires from Trump. But Putin still has a great challenge ahead of him if his intention is truly to conquer that entire vast region by force, village after village and city after city.